Morning light filtered softly through the tall windows of Willowmere Park, gilding the air with the fading warmth of autumn. At the drawing-room window stood Pearl Hartwell, her gaze following the gardeners as they gathered the last of the fallen leaves. 5 years had passed since she had entered this house as a bride, and only 3 months since she had become its widow. Beyond the glass, the Hampshire countryside lay cloaked in russet and gold, unaware of the silence that had settled within her heart. "Mrs. Hartwell," came the voice of Mrs. Fletcher, the housekeeper who had served the Hartwell family for over 20 years. "The solicitor has arrived." Pearl turned, smoothing the black bombazine of her morning dress. "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher. Please show Mr. Harrington to the study." At 24, Pearl carried herself with the quiet dignity of a woman who had learned to mask disappointment. Her chestnut hair was pulled back severely, as befitted a widow, though a few rebellious tendrils framed a face that, despite its solemnity, retained the delicate beauty of youth. Her eyes, a luminous hazel that her mother had once called changeable as the seasons, were perhaps her only notable feature, though few had bothered to notice them during her marriage. The death of Edmund Hartwell had not brought grief so much as a strange, hollow relief. Their marriage had been one of convenience, her father's business connections enhanced, Edmund's need for a respectable wife fulfilled. He had been 35 to her 19 when they wed, a man of rigid habits and few words. Pearl made her way to the study, a masculine room that still seemed to hold the essence of her late husband. The faint scent of tobacco, the meticulously arranged ledgers, the complete absence of comfort or beauty. Like the man himself, the room was functional, prosperous, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Mrs. Hartwell," Mr. Harrington greeted her, rising from his seat as she entered. "I trust you are well." "As well as can be expected, thank you," Pearl replied with practiced calm. She had spoken these words so often in recent weeks that they had lost all meaning. The solicitor cleared his throat. "I've finalized the details of Mr. Hartwell's will. As he had no male heir, Willowmere Park reverts to his cousin, Mr. Frederick Hartwell. However, you have been provided with a modest annual income and the use of the dower house on the estate's eastern boundary." Pearl had expected no more. Without children, a failing Edmund had frequently, if silently, attributed to her, she had no claim to Willowmere beyond what her husband's charity might allow. The dower house was small but comfortable, and the income, while not generous, would permit her to live with dignity. "When must I vacate the main house?" she asked, her voice steady. "Mr. Frederick Hartwell has generously allowed you 3 months to make arrangements," the solicitor replied, unable to meet her eyes. It was no secret that Frederick Hartwell was eager to take possession of his inheritance. "That is most considerate," Pearl said, her voice betraying nothing of her feelings. 3 months was little time to dismantle 5 years of her life. After the solicitor departed, Pearl stood in Edmund's study, surrounded by the masculine furnishings that had never welcomed her presence. During their marriage, she had dutifully managed the household, organized dinners for Edmund's business associates, and sat through long, silent evenings while he read his newspapers. They had shared a bed only in the most perfunctory manner, and when it became clear no child would result, Edmund had retreated to his own chambers. Pearl had never been unhappy, precisely. Edmund had not been cruel or unkind, merely indifferent. He had provided for her material needs and expected in return an efficient mistress for his household and a respectable companion for public appearances. He had not expected nor wanted her heart. And so Pearl had learned to lock away her girlish dreams of love and passion, to be content with duty well performed and responsibilities met. Now, standing in the gathering dusk, she felt a curious lightness. For the first time in 5 years, her time was her own, her future, however modest hers to determine. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Will you be requiring tea, madam?" Mrs. Fletcher inquired from the doorway. "No, thank you," Pearl replied. "I believe I shall take a walk." Outside, the brisk October air brought color to her cheeks. Pearl followed the path through the formal gardens, past the small ornamental lake, to a bench beneath an old oak tree. Here, away from the house, she permitted herself a moment of uncertainty. What would become of her now? Her parents were long dead, her father from a fever when she was 17, her mother from grief scarcely a year later. She had received an invitation from her cousin, Elizabeth Whitley, to visit London once her period of deep mourning had passed. Elizabeth, married to a prosperous merchant, had never approved of Pearl's match with Edmund Hartwell, calling him a man with more money than conversation. Perhaps London would offer some respite from the quiet desperation that had become her life. Pearl had long ago packed away her girlish dreams of romance, of being truly seen and cherished by someone who valued more than her family connections or her ability to preside over a dinner table. Yet sometimes in the secret corners of her heart, she wondered what it might be like to love and be loved in return. Foolishness, she murmured to herself, rising from the bench. At 24, a widow without fortune or particular beauty, her prospects were limited indeed. Better to accept her circumstances than to indulge in futile dreams. As the evening drew in, Pearl returned to the house that would soon no longer be her home. She ate a solitary dinner in the small breakfast room, never having felt comfortable in the grand dining room meant for entertaining, then retired to her sitting room, where she took up her embroidery, a habit acquired to fill the endless empty hours of her marriage. "Mrs. Hartwell," Mrs. Fletcher interrupted some time later, "you've received a letter." Pearl looked up in surprise. Few people wrote to her, especially now that the initial flurry of condolence notes had ceased. The letter bore the seal of Lady Caroline Cavendish, one of the few women in the county who had shown Pearl genuine kindness. "My dear Mrs. Hartwell, I write to extend an invitation to dine with us next Friday evening. I understand your period of mourning makes social engagements difficult, but this shall be a small gathering of intimate friends only, and I do believe some company would do you good. My nephew, the Duke of Silverton, is visiting from London and has expressed interest in meeting the local families. Do say you will come." Your friend, Caroline Cavendish Pearl, hesitated. Strictly speaking, she should decline, as she was still in the first stage of mourning. Yet the prospect of an evening away from Willowmere's oppressive silence was tempting. Lady Caroline had always been kind, and her gatherings were known to be pleasant, lacking the stiffness of formal society events. With a small sigh, Pearl reached for her writing desk. Society might frown, but she would accept Lady Caroline's invitation. After all, what more did she have to lose? In the days leading up to the dinner, Pearl found herself experiencing an unfamiliar sensation, anticipation. The feeling was so foreign that she scarcely recognized it at first, mistaking it for anxiety. But as she selected her simplest black evening gown and instructed Annie, her lady's maid, on how to arrange her hair, she realized that she was actually looking forward to the evening. "You seem brighter today, ma'am," Annie observed as she brushed Pearl's chestnut locks. "Do I?" Pearl replied, surprised. "I suppose I am looking forward to Lady Caroline's dinner." "It's good to see, if you don't mind my saying so," the maid continued. "You've been too much alone these past months." Pearl met the girl's eyes in the mirror. Had she been so transparent in her loneliness? "Perhaps you're right, Annie. Perhaps it is time I rejoined the world, however modestly." Pearl's mind drifted back to her childhood, before the series of misfortunes that had led to her marriage to Edmund. She had been a spirited girl, full of curiosity and passion for life. Her mother, a gentle woman with a love of poetry and music, had encouraged Pearl's interests in botany and literature. Her father, though primarily concerned with his shipping business, had indulged his only child, proud of her quick mind and determined nature. "You'll make a fine match someday," he'd often declared, "to a man worthy of your spirit." But when fever took him in the prime of his life, leaving substantial debts and a grieving widow, Pearl's future had suddenly narrowed. Her mother, never strong, had faded away within a year, leaving Pearl alone in the world at 18, with only distant relatives to rely upon. Edmund Hartwell, a prosperous landowner 20 years her senior, had been introduced to Pearl at a dinner party hosted by her father's former business partner. His proposal, made after just 3 meetings, had been presented as a practical solution to her precarious situation. No mention was made of affection or compatibility. It was a business arrangement, plain and simple, and Pearl, young and frightened with few other options, had accepted. "The carriage is ready, ma'am." Annie's voice broke through her reflections. "And you do look lovely." Pearl smiled at her maid, grateful for the young woman's loyalty. "Thank you, Annie. I shall not be late." On Friday evening, as her small carriage made its way along the lane to Cavendish Hall, Pearl felt a flutter of nerves. What if she had forgotten how to make conversation? What if the other guests stared or whispered behind their hands about the young widow attending a social function so soon after her husband's death? But as the carriage pulled up to the imposing facade of Cavendish Hall, Pearl reminded herself that Lady Caroline was not one to tolerate unkindness among her guests. Taking a deep breath, she allowed the footman to help her down from the carriage. The butler who answered the door recognized her immediately. "Mrs. Hartwell," he greeted her with a respectful bow. "Lady Caroline will be most pleased you have come. May I show you to the drawing room?" Pearl followed him through the elegant entrance hall, admiring as always the paintings and sculpture that Lady Caroline had collected during her travels. The Cavendish family had been patrons of the arts for generations, and their home reflected a refined aesthetic sensibility that Pearl had always found soothing. "Mrs. Pearl Hartwell," the butler announced as she entered the drawing room. Lady Caroline Cavendish, a handsome woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and intelligent eyes, came forward immediately. "My dear Pearl, I'm so pleased you could join us." She lowered her voice. "I know it's somewhat unconventional, but life is too short for excessive propriety, especially when one has endured as much solitude as you have." "You're very kind," Pearl replied, genuinely grateful for the older woman's understanding. "Come, let me introduce you to our small party." The gathering was indeed intimate. No more than 12 guests. Pearl recognized most. Sir William and Lady Bennet, neighbors to the west, Mr. Harrison, the local magistrate, and his wife, and Dr. E. Collins, who had attended Edmund in his final illness. "And this," Lady Caroline said, leading Pearl toward a tall figure standing by the fireplace, "is my nephew, Russell Grenville, the Duke of Silverton." Pearl curtsied deeply, as was proper when meeting a duke. "Your Grace." "Mrs. Hartwell," the Duke replied, his voice deep and resonant. When Pearl rose from her curtsy, she found herself looking into the most penetrating grey eyes she had ever encountered. The Duke of Silverton was perhaps 35, with dark hair swept back from a high forehead, and features that, while not conventionally handsome, possessed a compelling intensity. Unlike many aristocrats who affected an air of bored superiority, the Duke seemed keenly observant, his gaze direct and assessing. "I understand you are recently widowed," he said. "Please accept my condolences." "Thank you, Your Grace," Pearl responded automatically, surprised by the genuine note in his voice. Most expressions of sympathy she had received contained an undercurrent of pity that she found difficult to bear. "My aunt speaks highly of you," the Duke continued. "She tells me you have a remarkable knowledge of botany." Pearl felt a flush of surprise. Her interest in plants was something few people knew about or expressed interest in. "I merely dabble, Your Grace. It passed the time at Willowmere." Something in his expression suggested he understood more than she had said. "Sometimes our dabblings reveal more of our true selves than our public faces, don't you think?" Before Pearl could respond, Lady Caroline announced that dinner was served. To her surprise, Pearl found herself seated beside the Duke. Dinner at Cavendish Hall was always a pleasant affair, with excellent food and easy conversation. Lady Caroline had a gift for gathering people who could speak intelligently on various topics without descending into argument or tedium. "You mentioned botany, Mrs. Hartwell," the Duke said as the first course was served. "Do you have a particular area of interest?" "Medicinal herbs," Pearl admitted. "My grandmother was known for her remedies, and she taught me to identify many plants before I was 10. It's not a very fashionable interest for a lady, I'm afraid." "Fashionable interests are often the least substantial," the Duke replied. "I find genuine passion for any subject far more compelling." Throughout dinner, Pearl found herself engaged in the most stimulating conversation she had experienced in years. The Duke was well-travelled and widely read, but what impressed her most was his attentiveness. When she spoke, he listened as if her words mattered. "You mentioned your grandmother's remedies," he said as they discussed her interest in plants. "Have you continued her work?" Pearl hesitated. "In a small way. I grow certain herbs in my garden and prepare tinctures and salves for the tenants at Willowmere. My husband considered it a harmless hobby, though he discouraged me from being too familiar with those he considered beneath our station." The Duke's expression darkened slightly. "A narrow view. In my experience, those who work the land often possess wisdom that those in grand houses would do well to heed." As the evening progressed, Pearl became increasingly aware of a strange sensation, the awakening of a part of herself that had long been dormant. For 5 years, she had been Mrs. Edmund Hartwell, a role that required little of her true self. Now, conversing with the Duke of Silverton, she felt seen for the first time since her marriage. After dinner, the gentlemen remained for port, while the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room. Lady Bennet immediately took the opportunity to question Pearl. "The Duke seems quite taken with you," she observed with a raised eyebrow. "I'm sure His Grace is merely being courteous," Pearl replied, uncomfortable with the implication. "Russell is never merely anything," Lady Caroline said, joining them. "He finds most social occasions tedious and rarely engages so thoroughly with someone he's just met. You've made quite an impression, my dear." Pearl was saved from responding when the gentlemen rejoined them. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly, with music from Lady Bennet's daughter, who played the pianoforte with skill if not great passion, and conversation that ranged from local affairs to wider political matters. As the evening drew to a close, the Duke approached Pearl once more. "Mrs. Hartwell, I understand from my aunt that you sometimes walk near the lake between our properties. I am an early riser myself and find morning air beneficial for clarity of thought. Perhaps our paths might cross tomorrow?" The suggestion was improper. A widow in mourning should not agree to meet a gentleman alone, yet Pearl found herself nodding. "I often walk there around 8 o'clock. Then perhaps I shall enjoy the same view tomorrow," he replied, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than was strictly proper. As Pearl's carriage rolled away from Cavendish Hall, she pressed her fingers to her flushed cheeks. What had come over her? To agree to such an arrangement was foolish and potentially scandalous, yet for the first time in years, she felt a flutter of something like anticipation. Back at Willowmere, Pearl dismissed Annie earlier than usual and sat before her mirror studying her reflection. The woman who gazed back at her seemed different somehow, less resigned, more alive. Her eyes, usually so carefully guarded, held a spark that had been missing for too long. "This is madness," she whispered to herself. "He is a duke, far above your station. This can only end in heartbreak." Yet as she lay in bed that night, Pearl found herself hoping the morning would bring clear skies. The morning dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight filtering through the thinning canopy of trees along the path to the lake. Pearl had dressed with care in a simple walking dress of dark grey, her mourning colours still observed, but with slightly more attention to the fit and style than she usually permitted herself. A woolen shawl protected her from the morning chill, and she had forgone a bonnet in favour of a simple arrangement of her hair, secured with tortoise-shell pins. "Will you require company on your walk today, ma'am?" asked Annie, her lady's maid, as Pearl prepared to leave. "No, thank you. I prefer solitude for my morning constitutional," Pearl replied, avoiding the young woman's gaze. She disliked deceiving the maid, who had been kind and loyal during the difficult months of Edmund's illness and death, but she could hardly admit to a planned meeting with the Duke of Silverton. The lake that formed the boundary between Willowmere Park and Cavendish Hall's grounds was a tranquil spot, often shrouded in mist in the early hours. As Pearl approached, she saw a solitary figure standing at the water's edge, his tall frame unmistakable even at a distance. Her heart quickened, and she nearly turned back. This was improper, potentially ruinous to her reputation, yet something drew her forward, perhaps the same something that had been awakened during their conversation the previous evening. The Duke of Silverton turned as she approached, and his face brightened with a smile that transformed his serious countenance. "Mrs. Hartwell," he greeted her, bowing. "I am pleased our paths have indeed crossed." "Your Grace," Pearl curtsied, conscious of the impropriety of their meeting, yet unable to regret it. "You find our little lake to your liking?" "It has much to recommend it," he replied, his gaze direct. "Not least the company one might find here." They began to walk along the shore, maintaining a respectable distance between them. The Duke seemed content to match his long stride to her more measured pace. "Did you sleep well after last night's dinner?" he inquired. "Well enough," Pearl replied, hesitating before adding, "though I confess our conversation left me with much to consider." "Oh, in what way?" "It has been some time since I engaged in such discourse. My late husband preferred practical matters to philosophical ones." The Duke nodded thoughtfully. "Many men do. The business of managing estates and investments is certainly important, but I have always believed that we diminish ourselves when we neglect the life of the mind and heart." "The mind, perhaps," Pearl allowed. "The heart is more complicated." Indeed it is. He glanced at her, his grey eyes thoughtful. Tell me about yourself, Mrs. Hartwell. Not the version presented to society, but who you truly are. The request was startling in its directness. I'm afraid I'm not very practiced at speaking of myself, Your Grace. Russell, he said quietly, when we are alone, I would be honored if you would call me Russell. That would be most improper, Pearl murmured, though the idea sent a thrill through her. Perhaps, he acknowledged with a slight smile, but I find I care little for propriety when it stands in the way of genuine connection. They had reached a fallen log that served as a natural bench. The Duke gestured to it. Shall we? Pearl hesitated, then seated herself, careful to maintain a proper distance. The Duke, Russell, remained standing, gazing out over the water. I am considered something of an oddity among my peers, he said suddenly. I inherited the dukedom 5 years ago, after my father and elder brother died within months of each other. I was never raised to bear the title, being a second son, and I find many of the expectations constraining. Pearl was surprised by his candor. It must have been difficult assuming such responsibility unexpectedly. It was, he agreed, but perhaps not as difficult as being married to a man who never truly saw you. She looked up sharply. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? His grey eyes held hers, and Pearl felt as though he could see straight through the careful facade she had constructed over the years. I observed you last night, Pearl. Forgive my presumption in using your given name. You came alive during our conversation in a way that suggests such engagement has been rare in your experience. Pearl should have been offended by his forwardness, yet she found herself responding to his honesty with her own. My marriage was not a love match, she admitted, her fingers twisting in her lap. Edmund was a respectable man, but we had little in common. He married me because a business associate's daughter was suitable, and my father agreed because Edmund's position was secure. She looked away. It was not an unhappy marriage, merely an empty one. An emptiness that can be more painful than outright cruelty, Russell said softly. To be present but unseen is its own kind of loneliness. Pearl felt a strange relief at having her experience so perfectly understood. Yes, she whispered. That's exactly it. And now? Russell asked. What do you desire now that you are free to choose your own path? The question caught Pearl off guard. No one had asked what she wanted in so long that she scarcely knew how to answer. I haven't permitted myself to consider it, she finally said. My immediate future is the dower house once Mr. Frederick Hartwell takes possession of Willowmere. That is what circumstance dictates, Russell pressed gently. But what does Pearl Hartwell wish for? A dozen forbidden dreams flashed through her mind. Travel, learning, companionship, passion, things she had packed away years ago as impossible fancies. I suppose I wish to feel alive, she whispered, scarcely believing her own boldness. To experience the world rather than merely observing it through a window. Russell sat beside her then, careful to maintain propriety, yet close enough that she could sense his warmth. I felt it too, he said quietly. Last night at dinner, a recognition of something kindred, as if I had been waiting to meet you without knowing it. Pearl's breath caught. Your Grace, Russell, such talk is dangerous. Only if we fear what it might lead to, he replied, and I find, quite unexpectedly, that I am not afraid. The morning light caught his profile, illuminating the strength in his features and the surprising gentleness in his expression. Pearl felt herself drawn to him, not merely because of his position or appearance, but because of the authenticity he offered, the chance to be seen and valued for herself alone. I must return to Willowmere soon, she said reluctantly. The household will wonder at my absence. Will you walk with me again tomorrow? He asked, rising and offering his hand to help her up. Pearl hesitated only briefly before placing her gloved fingers in his. Yes, she said simply. I will. As they parted ways at the boundary between the two estates, Pearl glanced back to find Russell still watching her. He raised his hand in a gesture that felt somehow more intimate than any touch. That night, alone in her bedchamber, Pearl removed the pins from her hair and let it fall loose around her shoulders. In the mirror she saw a woman transformed, her eyes brighter, her cheeks flushed, her posture straighter. What are you doing? She asked her reflection. He is a duke, and you are a widow with nothing to offer. Yet even as she cautioned herself, Pearl knew she would meet him again tomorrow and the day after, for as long as he wished. For the first time in 5 years, perhaps in her entire life, she felt truly alive, and she could not bring herself to turn away from that feeling, whatever the consequences might be. The next morning, Pearl woke earlier than usual, her heart racing with anticipation. A quick glance outside revealed a day quite different from the previous one. Heavy clouds loomed on the horizon, and a brisk wind rustled through the trees. Still, nothing would deter her from the promised meeting. "The weather appears threatening, Ma'am," Annie observed as she helped Pearl dress. "Perhaps your walk should be postponed today." "A little wind doesn't frighten me," Pearl replied, selecting a heavier cloak than she'd worn the day before. "The exercise will do me good." Annie gave her mistress a curious look, but said nothing more. Pearl felt a twinge of guilt at the continued deception, but she pushed it aside. For once in her life, she was following her heart, rather than the dictates of propriety or expectation. When she reached the lake, Russell was already there, his figure silhouetted against the roiling grey clouds. He turned at her approach, and the smile that transformed his face sent a warm current through her despite the chill in the air. "I feared the weather might keep you away," he said, taking her gloved hands briefly in his. "It would take more than a few clouds to deter me," Pearl replied, surprised by her own candor. They walked along the shoreline as they had the day before, but with a new ease between them, as if they had known each other for years rather than days. Russell told her of his childhood as a second son, free from the crushing expectations that had been placed on his older brother. "I traveled extensively," he explained, "studied at Oxford, then spent nearly 2 years exploring the continent before Napoleon made such journeys impossible. I thought perhaps I might pursue diplomacy or scholarship. I never imagined I would inherit the title." "How did it happen?" Pearl asked gently, "if it's not too painful to discuss." "My father contracted pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter," Russell said, his expression somber. "My brother, who had always been of delicate health, rushed from London to be at his bedside. The journey in such weather proved too much for him. He fell ill shortly after arriving at Silverton House, and both he and my father were gone within a fortnight of each other." "How terrible for you," Pearl murmured, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm in sympathy. "It was a dark time," he acknowledged, "made more complex by the fact that my brother left behind a fiancée, Lady Eleanor Talbot, whom many expected me to marry in his stead, to keep the planned alliance between our families intact." Pearl felt an unexpected surge of jealousy. "And did you?" "No," Russell replied firmly, though there was considerable pressure from both families. Eleanor was a suitable match for the dukedom, but we had no affection for each other. I refused to condemn us both to a marriage without love. The rain that had been threatening all morning finally began to fall, large drops splattering onto the path around them. "We should seek shelter," Russell said, looking around. "There's a gamekeeper's cottage nearby, abandoned now, but still sound." They hurried through the increasing downpour to a small stone building nestled among the trees at the edge of the Cavendish property. It was indeed abandoned, but, as Russell had said, still structurally sound. He pushed open the door and they stepped inside, out of the rain that now fell in earnest. The cottage was simple: one room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, and a single chair. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling beams, but it was dry and offered protection from the storm that had descended upon them. "Not quite the setting I would have chosen for our conversation," Russell said with a wry smile, helping Pearl remove her sodden cloak and hanging it near the fireplace. "But it seems fate has its own ideas." "Indeed." Pearl moved toward the fireplace, noticing with relief that there was still wood stacked beside it. "Might we light a fire? My gown is rather damp." "Of course." Russell knelt at the hearth, skillfully arranging kindling and logs. Pearl watched in surprise as he worked confidently with flint and steel to ignite the fire. "You seem quite proficient at this," she observed. "My travels taught me many practical skills," he replied, feeding the growing flame. "I've spent nights in far less comfortable accommodations than this, I assure you." As the fire began to cast a warm glow throughout the small space, Pearl became acutely aware of their situation. Alone together in an isolated cottage, with a storm raging outside. It was highly improper, potentially scandalous if anyone were to discover them. Yet instead of anxiety, she felt a curious sense of rightness, as if the universe had conspired to create this moment of privacy between them. "Your dress will never dry properly while you're wearing it," Russell observed, his tone matter-of-fact rather than suggestive. "There's a blanket on that shelf, rough but clean enough. You could wrap yourself in it and hang your gown by the fire." Pearl felt herself flush. "I couldn't possibly—" "I'll wait outside on the porch," he added quickly, misinterpreting her hesitation. "The overhang will keep me dry enough." "No," Pearl said, the words surprising them both. "That's unnecessary. I trust you, Russell. But perhaps you could turn your back for a moment?" He nodded, moving to face the wall while Pearl quickly loosened her gown, slipping it off to reveal the chemise and petticoats beneath. She wrapped the blanket around herself, then hung the damp garment on a hook near the fire. "You may turn around now," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. When Russell faced her again, his expression was one of such gentle reverence that Pearl's momentary embarrassment faded. He removed his own coat, which was soaked through, and hung it beside her dress before settling on the floor near the fire, gesturing for Pearl to take the cottage's only chair. "It seems we are to be stormbound for a while," he observed, looking toward the window where rain lashed against the glass. "I hope your household won't be too concerned about your absence." "They're accustomed to my long walks," Pearl replied, "though perhaps not in such weather." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the drumming of rain on the roof. There was an intimacy to the moment that should have frightened Pearl, yet she felt only a deep sense of peace. "May I ask you something?" Russell said at last, his grey eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Of course. What did you dream of before life led you to Edmund Hartwell? What did the young Pearl wish for her future?" The question stirred memories long buried. "I wanted to travel," she admitted, "to see the great gardens of Europe, to study plants that couldn't grow in England's climate, to write a comprehensive guide to medicinal herbs that might be useful to ordinary people." She smiled softly at the recollection. "My mother always said I had more curiosity than was entirely proper for a young lady. She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was, gentle but strong in her own way. She loved poetry and could recite Byron from memory. Pearl's voice grew wistful. "She would have wanted more for me than I settled for." "It's not too late, you know," Russell said quietly, "to pursue some of those dreams." "Perhaps not all is lost," Pearl conceded, "though travel seems unlikely for a widow of modest means." "Unless she had a companion who shared her interests," Russell suggested, his gaze intent. "Someone who could show her the gardens of Paris, the ancient herbaria of Italy." Pearl's heart quickened. "Russell, what are you saying?" He moved from his place by the fire to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm saying that since the moment I saw you, I've felt a connection I've never experienced before. I'm saying that in just 2 days, you've awakened parts of me I thought long dormant. I'm saying that I believe we were meant to find each other, Pearl Hartwell. But I am so far beneath your station," she protested weakly. "Society would never—" "Society," Russell interrupted with uncharacteristic vehemence, "has never dictated my choices, and I won't allow it to do so now. I am asking for nothing yet, only the chance to continue knowing you, to explore what lies between us without the constraints of rank or expectation." Outside, a crack of thunder punctuated his words, so close that the small cottage seemed to shudder. Pearl felt her own barriers crumbling in its wake. "Yes," she whispered, squeezing his hands. "I want that too." The rain continued throughout the day, trapping them in their unexpected sanctuary. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes, their disappointments. Pearl spoke of her parents' love for each other, how it had shaped her understanding of what marriage could be. Russell described his years at Oxford, his friendships there, his love of ancient languages and philosophy. As afternoon began to fade toward evening, the rain finally slackened. They both knew their time in this suspended reality was coming to an end. "Your household will be truly concerned by now," Russell said, helping Pearl into her now dry gown. His touch, though proper, sent tingles of awareness through her. "Yes," she agreed reluctantly. "And yours as well, I imagine." "My aunt is accustomed to my independent ways," he replied with a smile. "But she will certainly have questions about where I've spent the day." They stepped outside into the fresh, rain-washed air. The storm had cleared, leaving behind a sky of impossible blue and trees glistening with droplets that sparkled in the late afternoon sunlight. "I feel as though everything looks different now," Pearl murmured, gazing at the familiar landscape transformed by the rain. "Because everything is different," Russell replied, his eyes holding hers. "We are different, you and I, than we were this morning." He was right, Pearl realized. Something fundamental had shifted during those hours in the cottage, a deepening of connection, an acknowledgement of possibility that could never be undone. "Will I see you tomorrow?" she asked, no longer pretending that these meetings were chance encounters. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Russell promised, raising her hand to his lips for a kiss that, even through her glove, sent warmth coursing through her. "Same time, by the lake?" "I'll be there," Pearl assured him. As they parted at the boundary of their respective estates, Pearl felt lighter than she had in years, as if the rain had washed away not just the dust of the day, but the resignation that had long weighed down her spirit. Whatever came of this unexpected connection with the Duke of Silverton, friendship, scandal, or something she scarcely dared name even to herself, she knew she would not regret a moment of it. Over the next week, Pearl and Russell met each morning by the lake. Their conversations ranged widely: literature, philosophy, their childhoods, their dreams, and with each meeting the connection between them deepened. Though they maintained all outward propriety, never touching save for the briefest contact, when he helped her over uneven ground, Pearl felt herself falling irrevocably in love with the Duke of Silverton. It was madness, she knew. She was a widow of modest means, he a powerful duke with responsibilities to his title and estate. Yet when they were together, such differences seemed to fade away, leaving only two souls who recognized in each other something essential and true. During one particularly intimate conversation, Russell had confessed his own disillusionment with the aristocratic marriages he had witnessed. "My parents were strangers who shared a title and a bed," he had told her. "My mother performed her duty by producing an heir and a spare, then retreated into her own interests, while my father busied himself with Parliament and his mistresses. I vowed I would never condemn myself to such emptiness." "Yet as a duke, you must marry," Pearl had pointed out. "Your title demands succession." "The title demands many things," Russell had replied, his expression serious. "But I have learned that duty without passion is a hollow shell. I would rather the dukedom end with me than perpetuate the cycle of loveless marriages that has plagued my family for generations." Such sentiments only deepened Pearl's feelings for him. Here was a man who understood, who valued substance over form, who might, if circumstances were different, be capable of loving her as she increasingly longed to be loved. But reality could not be ignored forever. On the 10th day of their morning meetings, Russell arrived with a troubled expression. "I must return to London tomorrow," he said without preamble. "Parliamentary matters require my attention." Pearl felt her heart constrict. She had known their idyll could not last, yet the prospect of his departure was more painful than she had anticipated. "Of course," she said, keeping her voice steady, "you have responsibilities." "Pearl," Russell stopped walking and turned to face her. "These past days with you have been... I lack the words to express what they have meant to me." She looked up at him, trying to memorize every line of his face, knowing she might never see him again. "They have been precious to me as well." "I don't wish them to end," he said, his voice low and urgent. "When my business in London is complete, I intend to return. Would you permit me to call on you then?" The propriety Pearl had been raised to observe warred with the feelings that had blossomed in her heart. A duke calling on a widow in a dower house would set tongues wagging throughout the county. "Your Grace, Russell," he corrected gently. "Always Russell when we are alone." "Russell," she amended, the name like honey on her tongue. "You know as well as I that such a visit would be considered inappropriate." "I care nothing for what is considered appropriate," he replied with sudden vehemence. "I care only for what is true, what is real. And what I feel for you, Pearl Hartwell, is the most real thing I have ever known." Pearl's breath caught at the intensity in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that in 10 days you have awakened something in me I thought dead. I'm saying that the thought of not seeing you again is unbearable." He took her hands in his, propriety forgotten. "I'm saying that I believe I am falling in love with you." The world seemed to stop. Pearl stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Your Grace, Russell, you cannot mean that. You are a duke and I am—" A woman of intelligence, compassion, and beauty, he finished for her. A woman who sees me, not my title. A woman I cannot imagine my life without. Pearl trembled, overwhelmed by emotions too powerful to contain. But society would never accept— "Let society gossip," Russell interrupted. "I have wealth and position enough to weather any storm of disapproval. What I lack, what I have always lacked, is someone who makes me feel as you do." He released her hands and stepped back, as if realizing he had revealed too much too quickly. "Forgive me. I did not mean to overwhelm you." His expression softened. "I leave for London tomorrow, but I will return in 2 weeks. Will you consider what I've said? Will you at least allow me to call on you when I return?" Pearl looked into the face of this man, who had somehow, in the span of 10 days, become the center of her world. How could she deny him, deny herself, the chance to discover what might grow between them? "Yes," she said softly, "I will consider it. And yes, you may call on me when you return." Relief and joy transformed his features. "Thank you," he said simply, though the words contained volumes of meaning. As they parted that day, Russell raised her gloved hand to his lips, pressing a kiss that even through the fabric sent warmth coursing through her. "Until my return," he murmured, his eyes holding a promise that made her heart race. "Until then," Pearl replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The following day, Russell departed for London. The fortnight of his absence stretched before Pearl like an endless desert. She moved to the Dower House as planned, Frederick Hartwell having taken possession of Willowmere with unseemly haste. The smaller residence suited her better, in truth, lacking the painful memories of her marriage. Yet, as she arranged her few possessions in her new home, Pearl found herself plagued by doubt. Could a duke truly love a woman of her station? Would society's disapproval eventually poison whatever feelings Russell had for her? Was she risking her heart, her reputation, perhaps even her future security, for a romance that could only end in heartbreak? On the 3rd day after Russell's departure, Pearl was sorting through the small collection of books she had brought from Willowmere when a knock at the door startled her. Mrs. Simmons, the housekeeper who had come with the Dower House, appeared in the doorway. "A Lady Caroline Cavendish to see you, ma'am," she announced with undisguised curiosity. It was unusual for a woman of Lady Caroline's standing to call on a widow in a Dower House, particularly one who had so recently moved in. "Thank you, Mrs. Simmons. Please show her to the drawing-room," Pearl replied, hastily checking her appearance in the small mirror above the fireplace. Her simple morning dress was respectable enough, though hardly what she would have chosen for receiving such an illustrious visitor. Lady Caroline was examining the modest furnishings of the drawing-room when Pearl entered, but turned immediately with a warm smile. "My dear," the older woman said, coming forward to take Pearl's hands, "I hope you don't mind my calling without invitation. I was eager to see how you were settling in." "Not at all," Pearl assured her. "It's a pleasure to have your company. Please, won't you sit down?" As Lady Caroline arranged herself on the small sofa, Pearl rang for tea, grateful that the Dower House's modest provisions included a serviceable tea service. When Mrs. Simmons had brought the tea and withdrawn, closing the door behind her, Lady Caroline's expression grew more serious. "My dear," she began, "I believe we must have a frank conversation." Pearl braced herself for disapproval. "About your nephew, I presume?" "Indeed." Lady Caroline studied her thoughtfully. "Russell has written to me of his feelings for you." "I'm sure you must think it most inappropriate," Pearl said, her fingers twisting in her lap. "A duke and a merchant's daughter without fortune or connection." "What I think," Lady Caroline interrupted, "is that my nephew has never looked at any woman the way he looks at you. What I think is that you have brought light back into his eyes." She reached over and patted Pearl's hand. "Happiness is too rare a commodity to reject because of convention, my dear." Pearl stared at her, scarcely believing what she was hearing. "You approve?" "Wholeheartedly," Lady Caroline smiled. "Russell has carried too many burdens alone since inheriting the title. He needs a partner, not merely a duchess. Someone who values the man, not the position." Tears stung Pearl's eyes. "I do love him," she confessed. "So much it frightens me." "The best loves often do," Lady Caroline said wisely. "Now shall we discuss how to handle the inevitable gossip when your engagement is announced?" "Engagement?" Pearl echoed, startled. He has spoken only of his feelings, not of marriage. My dear, Lady Caroline laughed softly, I have known Russell since he was in short coats. He does nothing by halves. If he loves you, and I believe he does, then he will certainly ask for your hand. Her expression grew more serious. The question is, are you prepared for what becoming his Duchess would entail? Not all of society will welcome you with open arms. Pearl considered the question carefully. Could she face the scrutiny, the whispers, perhaps even the snubs that being Russell's wife might bring? Was her love for him strong enough to weather such challenges? I believe I am, she said at last. For him, for us, I can face anything. Lady Caroline nodded, satisfied. Good. Now, let us consider your wardrobe. Black becomes you, my dear, but I think when Russell returns, you might consider a gown in a softer shade, perhaps lavender or grey, and your hair. Such lovely chestnut tones should not be hidden in such a severe style. Pearl laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. Are you suggesting I set out to captivate your nephew, Lady Caroline? Certainly not, the older woman replied with a wink. He is already captivated. I am merely suggesting you remind him of exactly what he has been missing these past 2 weeks. The two women spent the remainder of the visit discussing practical matters, how Pearl might manage the transition from widow to Duchess, which members of society would be allies and which potential adversaries, what responsibilities she would face as mistress of Silverton House and the Duke's other estates. It won't be easy, Lady Caroline warned. There will be those who resent your rise, who will watch for any misstep, but you have natural dignity and intelligence, my dear. With a little guidance, you will make a splendid Duchess. After Lady Caroline departed, promising to call again soon, Pearl sat alone in her drawing room, her mind whirling with all she had learned. The possibility of becoming Russell's wife, of being a Duchess, was both thrilling and terrifying. Yet beneath the anxiety about protocol and social acceptance lay a deeper, simpler truth. She loved Russell Grenville with all her heart, and if he truly wanted her as his wife, nothing else mattered. The remaining days of Russell's absence passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. With Lady Caroline's guidance and the discreet assistance of her own modiste and lady's maid, Pearl acquired several new gowns in the softer colours appropriate for the later stages of mourning. Her hair, freed from its severe style, was arranged in a more becoming fashion that brought out the natural wave and highlighted the rich chestnut tones. "You look like a different woman, ma'am," Annie observed one morning as she put the finishing touches on Pearl's hair. "If you don't mind my saying so." "I feel like a different woman," Pearl admitted. And it was true. The resigned widow who had accepted her fate with quiet dignity was gone, replaced by a woman who dared to hope for a future filled with love and purpose. At last, the day of Russell's return arrived. He had sent a message asking her to meet him by the lake at their usual time. Pearl dressed with trembling hands, choosing a gown of deep blue that, while still appropriate for a widow, hinted at her readiness to move beyond mourning. Lady Caroline had sent her own maid to arrange Pearl's hair in a softer style, with curls framing her face and emphasizing its heart-shaped contours. "You look beautiful, ma'am," Annie said as Pearl prepared to leave. "If you don't mind my saying so, there's a light about you that hasn't been there before." Pearl smiled at the young woman. "Thank you, Annie. I feel different." The morning was bright and clear as she made her way to the lake. Russell was already there, his tall figure silhouetted against the water. He turned at the sound of her approach, and the joy that transformed his face at the sight of her banished Pearl's last doubts. He came toward her quickly, taking her hands in his. "Pearl," he said simply, his voice filled with emotion. "These 2 weeks have been interminable." "For me as well," she admitted, her heart racing at his touch. "Have you thought about what I said before I left?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Pearl took a deep breath. "I have thought of little else." "And?" The single word held a world of hope and uncertainty. "And I find that my heart has only one answer," she replied, allowing her feelings to show in her face for the first time. "I love you, Russell. More than I thought possible." His grip on her hands tightened. "Then will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The words hung in the air between them, momentous in their simplicity. Pearl felt herself trembling, not with fear, but with the enormity of the choice before her. "Are you certain?" she asked. "There will be talk, disapproval. Some doors may close to you because of me." "Let them close," Russell said with fierce conviction. "Any society that would reject you is not one I wish to be part of. Besides," he added with a smile, "I am a duke. My wealth and position afford me certain immunities." Pearl could not help but smile at his confidence. "Your aunt approves, it seems." "Of course she does. Caroline has always valued happiness over convention." His expression grew serious. "What of you, Pearl? Can you face the challenges that may come? Can you bear the scrutiny, the whispers, perhaps even the snubs, that being my Duchess might entail?" Pearl considered the question carefully. "I believe I can," she said at last. "For you, for us, I can face anything." With a cry of joy, Russell drew her into his arms. "Then say yes," he whispered against her hair. "Say you'll marry me." "Yes," Pearl breathed, her heart soaring. "Yes, Russell, I will marry you." Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their fate, tender at first, then deepening with the passion they had restrained for so long. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I have spoken with my solicitor in London," Russell said, his eyes alight with plans. "We can marry by special license as soon as you are ready." "What of society, the gossip?" "There will be talk," he acknowledged, "but it will die down, especially once they come to know you. Your grace, intelligence, and kindness will win them over, just as they won me." Pearl felt a surge of courage. After years of living according to others' expectations, she was choosing her own path at last. "Then let it be soon," she said. "I have waited long enough for happiness." Russell's smile was radiant. "So you have, my love. So you have." Their wedding, held in the chapel at Silverton House 6 weeks later, was a small but elegant affair. Lady Caroline stood proudly beside Pearl, while Russell's sister, Catherine, beamed with approval. The bride wore a gown of ivory silk, modest yet becoming, with pearls that had belonged to Russell's mother, adorning her throat and wrists. "You are so beautiful," Russell whispered as they exchanged vows. His eyes filled with a tenderness that brought tears to Pearl's. Society gossips were briefly scandalized by the Duke's choice of bride. The Tun's drawing rooms buzzed with speculation and, in some cases, outright disapproval. Yet, as Russell had predicted, Pearl's natural dignity and kindness soon won over all but the most determined critics. "She carries herself like a duchess born," observed Lady Harrington, an influential matron whose approval opened many doors that might otherwise have remained closed. "And the way the Duke looks at her," sighed Miss Eleanor Banning, a young debutante. "As if she hung the moon and stars. How romantic." The young Duchess's debut in London society was a pivotal moment. The annual ball at Silverton House had always been one of the highlights of the season, and anticipation ran particularly high for the first such event to be hosted by the new Duchess. Would she embarrass herself? Would the Duke regret his hasty marriage to a woman so clearly his social inferior? Pearl had spent weeks preparing, learning the intricate dances, memorizing the names and relationships of scores of aristocratic families, selecting gowns that would be appropriate without appearing ostentatious. By the night of the ball, she felt as though she had been studying for the most important examination of her life. "So you look like you're marching to your execution," Russell observed with gentle amusement, as they prepared to descend the grand staircase to greet their guests. "Remember, my love, you are the Duchess of Silverton. This is your home, and these are your guests. You have nothing to prove to anyone." Pearl squeezed his hand gratefully. "I only wish to make you proud." "You already do," he assured her. "Every day, in ways that have nothing to do with how well you can curtsy to a countess." With his steadfast support, Pearl found the confidence to face the scrutiny of London's elite. She greeted each guest with genuine warmth, danced every dance with grace if not particular expertise, and handled even the most pointed remarks with a dignity that impressed even her harshest critics. "I confess I had my doubts about the Duke's choice," Lady Hertford admitted to Lady Caroline as they watched Pearl charming a circle of diplomats' wives. "But she has a natural elegance about her, doesn't she? And such intelligent conversation. Not at all what one might expect from a country widow." "My nephew has always had excellent judgment," Lady Caroline replied serenely, "in all things except, perhaps, his choice of neckcloth." By the end of the season, Pearl had established herself as a respected, if not universally adored, member of society. She would never be a leader of fashion like the glamorous Lady Jersey, nor a political hostess like the formidable Lady Holland. But she had carved out her own niche, a salon where interesting conversation mattered more than rank, where artists and scientists mingled with aristocrats, where ideas were exchanged without regard for the usual social barriers. "You've created something rather remarkable," Russell told her one evening as the last guests departed from one of her gatherings. "A place where people can be themselves, not just their titles or fortunes." "I've only tried to make the kind of home I would wish to visit," Pearl replied modestly, "where substance matters more than appearance." As Duchess of Silverton, Pearl discovered strength she had never known she possessed. She managed the Duke's 3 estates with efficiency and grace, modernized the tenant farms with innovations that increased yields and improved living conditions, and established a hospital for women and children on the Silverton estate. She also became a patron of botanical research, funding expeditions to collect medicinal plants from around the world and establishing gardens where their properties could be studied. This work, once merely a dabbling to fill empty hours, became her passion and brought her recognition from the Royal Botanical Society. Russell, meanwhile, found in Pearl the partner he had always sought, someone who challenged his mind, supported his progressive political views, and loved him for himself rather than his title. Together, they made Silverton House a center of intellectual and social reform, hosting gatherings where ideas were valued above rank and genuine conversation replaced idle gossip. "I never knew marriage could be like this," Russell confessed one evening as they sat in the library, comfortable in each other's company. "A true partnership of minds and hearts." Pearl smiled, reaching across to take his hand. "Nor did I. My first marriage taught me only what love is not. You have shown me what it can be." Their intimate life, too, was a revelation to Pearl. Edmund's infrequent attentions had been perfunctory at best, leaving her believing that physical love was merely a duty to be endured. With Russell, she discovered the exquisite pleasure of desire freely given and received, of 2 bodies moving in perfect harmony, of passion that grew rather than diminished with familiarity. "You have awakened me in every way," she told him one night, as they lay entwined in their bed. "I feel as though I was half alive before I met you." "As was I," Russell replied, his fingers tracing the contours of her face. "You have given me a gift beyond price, Pearl, the knowledge that I am loved for myself, not for my title or my fortune." Their journey from first meeting to deep partnership had not been without its challenges. The early days of their marriage had seen moments of doubt, misunderstandings born of their different backgrounds, adjustments to the public scrutiny that came with Pearl's new position. There had been tears and arguments, wounded pride and hasty words. Yet through it all, their fundamental connection had remained unshaken. They had learned to communicate more openly, to trust more deeply, to forgive more quickly. Each challenge overcome had only strengthened the bond between them, proving that their love was not a fragile fairy tale, but a resilient, living thing capable of growth and adaptation. 1 year after their wedding, Pearl gave birth to a son, Edward Russell Grenville, future Duke of Silverton. The boy had his father's grey eyes and his mother's gentle smile, and both parents doted on him unashamedly. "He will be raised to value people for their character, not their rank," Russell declared as he held his newborn son, "and to follow his heart, as his father did." The following year brought a daughter, Caroline Elizabeth, with her mother's chestnut hair and her father's determined chin. Their family complete, Pearl and Russell divided their time between London and Silverton House, creating a home filled with love, respect, and genuine connection. As for Frederick Hartwell, he discovered to his dismay that Willowmere Park was not the profitable estate he had anticipated, its best lands having been quietly sold off by Edmund years before to cover gambling debts. Within 5 years, he was forced to sell the property, which was purchased to his further chagrin by the Duke of Silverton as a wedding gift for his beloved Duchess. "You need not do this," Pearl had protested when Russell told her of his intention. "Willowmere holds few happy memories for me." "Perhaps," he had replied, "but I thought our children might enjoy growing up with 2 homes, each with its own unique character. And besides," he added with a smile, "I like the symmetry of it, the place where you were once lonely becoming a place where you are loved beyond measure." They renovated Willowmere extensively, transforming Edmund's austere study into a warm family room filled with books and comfortable furniture, replacing the formal gardens with a more natural landscape that included a medicinal herb garden of Pearl's design. The small ornamental lake where they had first fallen in love remained untouched, a sacred space that held the beginning of their story. On summer evenings, Pearl and Russell often walked together by that lake, sometimes speaking of the strange twist of fate that had brought them together, sometimes simply enjoying the companionable silence that only those who truly know each other can share. "Do you ever regret it?" Pearl asked once as they watched their children playing at the water's edge. "Marrying so far beneath your station?" Russell turned to her, his eyes still holding the same intensity that had captivated her from the first. "I married the woman who made me whole," he said simply. "There is nothing beneath about that." And as he kissed her, Pearl knew that in his arms she had found not just love but the true home of her heart. Pearl's transformation from a lonely widow to the confident, respected Duchess of Silverton had not gone unnoticed by those who had known her in both roles. When she returned to Hampshire for the first time after her marriage, there was considerable curiosity among the local gentry about how success and status might have changed the quiet Mrs. Hartwell they had barely noticed during her years at Willowmere. "I half expected her to put on airs," Lady Bennet confided to her husband after calling at the newly renovated estate. "But she was as natural and gracious as ever, perhaps even more so. There's a serenity about her now, an assurance that comes from being truly valued." Indeed, Pearl had found that the security of Russell's love had freed her from the constant anxiety that had marked her first marriage, the need to anticipate Edmund's moods, to be always proper, always correct, always invisible. With Russell, she could be fully herself, with all her strengths and weaknesses, knowing she was cherished not in spite of her flaws, but as a complete human being. This freedom extended to her role as mother, where many aristocratic women left the raising of their children entirely to nursemaids and governesses. Pearl was a hands-on parent, teaching Edward and Caroline the names of plants in her garden, reading to them each night, instilling in them the values she and Russell shared. "Some of the older duchesses find it most peculiar," Lady Caroline remarked, after observing Pearl patiently showing 4-year-old Edward how to plant seedlings. "They believe children should be seen only at appointed hours, and certainly not with dirt under their fingernails." "Then the older duchesses must be scandalized indeed," Pearl replied with a laugh, brushing soil from her own hands. "For I intend my children to know the satisfaction of growing things, of creating rather than merely consuming." Russell, who had grown up with distant, formal parents, delighted in the warm family life Pearl created. He became the kind of father he had longed for as a boy, present, engaged, demonstrative in his affection. He taught Edward to ride, encouraged Caroline's precocious interest in books, and never missed the bedtime ritual of stories and prayers, no matter how pressing his parliamentary duties might be. "The business of the nation can wait," he would say, when his secretary protested yet another delayed meeting. But childhood does not. Together, Pearl and Russell were creating not just a family but a legacy, a new model of what aristocratic life could be, based on genuine connection rather than empty formality, on shared purpose rather than separate spheres. Their example influenced others in their circle, particularly younger couples who saw in the Duke and Duchess of Silverton a marriage to emulate rather than the typical aristocratic arrangement of mutual tolerance and discreet infidelities. "It's rather revolutionary when you think about it," observed Lord Amberley, a friend of Russell's from university days, "to suggest that peers and their wives might actually enjoy each other's company, might work together toward common goals." "Not revolutionary," Russell corrected him, "simply human. We have for too long allowed title and tradition to separate us from our natural desires for companionship and purpose." 10 years into their marriage, as they celebrated Edward's 9th birthday, Russell presented Pearl with a locket containing miniature portraits of their children. "You have given me more happiness than I ever dreamed possible," he told her, as he fastened the gold chain around her neck. "A family, a purpose, a love that grows stronger with each passing day." "As have you," Pearl replied, touching the locket that rested against her heart. "From a woman who had resigned herself to a life without passion, you made me into one who experiences joy in every moment." That night, as they lay together in the intimacy of their bedchamber, Pearl reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a widow facing an uncertain future, to the beloved wife of a duke, mother to his children, partner in his life. "What are you thinking?" Russell asked, noticing her contemplative expression. That life takes the most unexpected turns, she replied, nestling closer to him. That sometimes the greatest blessings come from the deepest sorrows. Indeed, he agreed, kissing her forehead. Had you not endured those 5 years with Edmund, had I not lost my father and brother, we might never have found each other. And now? And now, he said, his voice filled with the certainty that had sustained them through society's initial disapproval, through the challenges of their different backgrounds, through the ordinary trials that test any marriage. We have everything. Pearl smiled in the darkness, knowing it was true. From a loveless marriage endured for 5 years to a love discovered in one night, she had traveled a path she could never have imagined. And she would not change a single step that had led her to Russell's arms. As the years passed, Pearl and Russell's love only deepened, defying the conventional wisdom that passion inevitably fades with time. Their children grew strong and healthy, blessed with their father's intelligence and their mother's compassion. Edward, as the future Duke, received the finest education available, but also learned the value of treating all people with respect, regardless of their station. Caroline, bright and curious like her mother, showed an early interest in botany and medicine, accompanying Pearl on her rounds to the tenant cottages from the time she could walk. "Your father would be most displeased to see you attending to commoners," remarked Lady Everley, an elderly cousin of Russell's, during one of her rare visits to Silverton House. "Then I must be grateful that my husband encourages our children to develop their own sense of duty and compassion," Pearl replied calmly, long since immune to such barbs. Indeed, Russell took great pride in his wife's accomplishments, which now extended far beyond the management of their estates. Pearl's botanical garden had become renowned throughout England, and her research into medicinal plants had resulted in treatments that saved lives across the country. When the Royal Botanical Society took the unprecedented step of admitting her as its first female member, Russell hosted a celebration that was the talk of London for months. They could hardly refuse the Duchess of Silverton, Pearl demurred when he praised her achievement. "They admitted Pearl Hartwell, botanical scholar," Russell corrected her. "Your title may have opened the door, my love, but it was your brilliance that walked through it." Pearl's happiness was complete, or so she believed until the spring of 1825, when she discovered she was with child again, 12 years after Caroline's birth. The pregnancy was unexpected, and not without risk at her age, but Pearl faced it with characteristic courage. "Are you pleased?" she asked Russell when she shared the news, suddenly uncertain of his reaction to this unplanned addition to their family. His response was to sweep her into his arms, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "How could I be anything but overjoyed? Every child born of our love is a blessing beyond measure." The pregnancy progressed well until the 7th month, when Pearl awoke one night with sharp pains. Dr. Bennett, the trusted physician who had attended both her previous deliveries, was summoned immediately. "The baby is coming too early," he informed Russell gravely. "I will do everything in my power, but you must prepare yourself." The labor was long and difficult. Pearl, who had faced the birth of her other children with serene confidence, found herself struggling against waves of pain that threatened to pull her under. Throughout the ordeal, Russell remained by her side, defying convention to hold her hand and whisper words of love and encouragement. "Stay with me, my heart," he pleaded, as her strength began to fade. "Our family is not complete without you." In the cold, grey hours before dawn, Pearl gave birth to a tiny daughter. The infant's first cry, feeble but determined, seemed to infuse her mother with renewed strength. "She's fighting," Pearl murmured, watching as the midwife cleaned and swaddled the impossibly small child. "Our little warrior." "Like her mother," Russell replied, his voice thick with emotion. "The bravest woman I have ever known." They named her Hope Elizabeth, a testament to the faith that had seen them through the difficult birth. Against all expectations, the premature infant thrived, growing stronger each day under the devoted care of her parents and the watchful eyes of her older siblings. "She's a miracle," Caroline declared, utterly besotted with her baby sister, "just like in those tales where love conquers all." "Perhaps not a miracle," Pearl replied, watching as Edward solemnly rocked the cradle, "but certainly a reminder of how precious life is and how love sustains us through our darkest hours." The near loss of both Pearl and their youngest child affected Russell profoundly. Always a devoted husband, he became even more attentive, reluctant to be parted from his wife for even a day. "You needn't hover so, my love." Pearl teased him one afternoon as they walked in the garden, Hope nestled in her arms. "I am fully recovered, as the doctor has assured you repeatedly." "Can you blame me for treasuring what I so nearly lost?" Russell asked, his expression serious. "Those hours when I thought I might lose you were the darkest of my life." Pearl reached up to touch his cheek. "Yet here I am, stronger than ever. Here we all are." As Hope grew from infancy to childhood, it became clear that she possessed a special vivacity, a joy in living that seemed to illuminate everyone around her. Where Edward was thoughtful and Caroline scholarly, Hope was a whirlwind of energy and enthusiasm, equally at home climbing trees with the gardener's children or charming Russell's political associates with her precocious observations. "She is exactly what her name suggests," Pearl observed to Lady Caroline, who remained their steadfast friend and ally. "A living embodiment of optimism and possibility." "She takes after her mother in that regard," Lady Caroline replied with a knowing smile. "You too have always found light in the darkness, my dear." The comparison gave Pearl pause. Had she truly been such a hopeful person? She remembered the young widow she had been, resigned to a half-life in the dower house, her dreams carefully packed away. It was Russell who had awakened her, Russell who had shown her that life could hold more than duty and propriety. Yet perhaps Lady Caroline was right in her own way. Perhaps Pearl had carried hope within her all along, a tiny spark waiting for the right moment to blaze into life. And now, watching her youngest daughter race across the lawn, her laughter floating back on the summer breeze, Pearl knew that spark had become a flame that would never be extinguished. As the children grew older, Pearl and Russell faced the bittersweet task of guiding them toward their own futures. Edward, groomed from birth for his eventual role as Duke, nonetheless showed a keen interest in agricultural improvements and spent much of his time working alongside the estate manager, learning the practical aspects of land stewardship. "He will make a fine Duke one day," Russell remarked proudly, as they watched their son direct the implementation of a new drainage system that had been his own design. One who understands that privilege carries responsibility. Caroline, meanwhile, had developed her mother's interest in medicine to such a degree that she sought formal training, a radical step for a young woman of her rank. When she announced her intention to study under Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell in America, Pearl and Russell faced their first serious disagreement in years. "It is too far," Russell argued, "and entirely unnecessary. She could study privately with the finest physicians in London." "Who would never treat her as a true colleague," Pearl countered. "In America she has a chance to be judged on her abilities, not her gender or her title." The dispute lasted several tense days, until Caroline herself broke the impasse. "I love you both," she told them during a family dinner, "and I respect your concerns, Father, but I have inherited Mother's determination as well as her interest in healing. This is my path, and I must follow it wherever it leads." Russell, looking from his daughter's resolute face to his wife's hopeful one, surrendered with grace. "It seems I am outnumbered by the formidable women of my family," he sighed. "Very well, Caroline, you shall go to America with our blessing, and a promise to return to us when your studies are complete." "Always," she assured him, embracing him with tears in her eyes. "How could I stay away from the family that has taught me the meaning of love?" Caroline's departure for America was the first significant separation the family had experienced, and it left an emptiness that was felt keenly by all. Pearl threw herself into her botanical research with renewed vigor, working on a comprehensive guide to medicinal plants that she hoped to publish. Russell immersed himself in parliamentary affairs, championing reforms in education and labor laws that reflected the progressive values he and Pearl shared. Hope, now 16 and blossoming into a beauty that combined her father's aristocratic features with her mother's delicate coloring, became her parents' greatest comfort during Caroline's absence. Unlike many girls of her station, she showed little interest in the marriage market, preferring the company of books and animals to that of potential suitors. "There is time enough for her to find her path," Pearl assured Russell, when he expressed concern about their youngest daughter's apparent indifference to society. "She has your independent spirit, after all. And your kind heart," he added, watching as Hope patiently taught a village child to read in the shade of an ancient oak. "A dangerous combination." "The most powerful one," Pearl corrected him, slipping her hand into his. "Love and strength together can change the world." Caroline's letters from America arrived regularly, filled with descriptions of her studies and the extraordinary experience of working with Dr. Blackwell. "I am learning so much," she wrote, "not only about medicine but about a society where the boundaries between classes seem more permeable than at home. There is a freedom here, a sense that one might become anything through talent and hard work." "She sounds happy," Pearl observed to Russell as they read one such letter together. "And I believe she has found her true calling." "As have we all, in our different ways," Russell agreed. "You with your botanical studies, Edward with his agricultural innovations, Hope with her teaching. Even I, who inherited a path rather than choosing it, have found purpose in using my position to effect change." It was true. The Duke and Duchess of Silverton had become known throughout England not merely for their wealth and position, but for their progressive values and practical philanthropy. They had established schools on all their estates, built modern housing for their tenants, supported hospitals and orphanages, and used their influence to advocate for reforms that improved the lives of the most vulnerable members of society. "We have been fortunate beyond measure," Pearl reflected, "not just in our material circumstances, but in finding work that matters, in raising children who understand the value of service, in having each other as partners in all things." 25 years had passed since their first meeting by the lake, and though silver now threaded Pearl's chestnut hair and lines of experience marked Russell's face, the love between them remained as vibrant as ever. They had weathered the storms that life inevitably brings, illness, loss, the conflicts that arise even in the happiest of marriages, and emerged with their bond not merely intact, but strengthened. "Do you remember what you said to me the day you proposed?" Pearl asked as they sat together in the garden one autumn evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I said many things that day," Russell replied, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "Most of them inadequate to express what was in my heart." "You said that you believed you were falling in love with me," Pearl reminded him. Such cautious words from a man usually so certain. Russell laughed, the sound still as warm and rich as it had been in his youth. "I was terrified," he admitted, "not of loving you, but of frightening you away with the intensity of my feelings. I had never experienced anything like it before, that sense of recognition, of coming home after a lifetime of wandering." "Nor had I," Pearl said softly, "though I scarcely dared believe it could be real, let alone lasting." "And now?" Russell asked, his grey eyes, still keen despite the years, searching hers. "Now I know that love can deepen with each passing day," she replied. "That passion need not fade, but can transform into something even more powerful. That two people who choose each other again and again can create a marriage that nurtures not only themselves, but everyone around them." Russell raised her hand to his lips, the gesture as reverent as it had been the first time. "You have made me the happiest of men, Pearl Hartwell Grenville. From the moment you agreed to walk with me by the lake to this very day, each moment with you has been a gift I never deserved, but will eternally cherish." "We have been blessed," Pearl agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "In our children, in our work, in the life we have built together, but most of all, in finding each other when neither of us believed true love was possible." In the years that followed, their family continued to grow and evolve. Edward married Lady Julia Fairfax, a gentle but strong-willed young woman who complemented his serious nature perfectly. Their first child, a son named Russell after his grandfather, was born the following year, ensuring the continuation of the Grenville line. Caroline returned from America with her medical degree and a wealth of new knowledge, which she put to use establishing a women's clinic in London. Though she received numerous offers of marriage, she chose to remain single, devoted to her work and to her extended family. And Hope, their unexpected blessing, eventually found her calling in advocating for children's education. With her parents' support, she established a network of schools that provided learning opportunities for all children, regardless of their background or circumstances. When she finally did marry at the age of 28, it was to a professor of literature who shared her passion for knowledge and her belief in its power to transform lives. Through it all, Pearl and Russell remained the center of their family's universe, their enduring love providing a foundation of stability and acceptance that allowed each member to flourish in their own way. "We have created something remarkable," Russell observed on their 30th wedding anniversary, as they looked around at the gathering of children, grandchildren, and dear friends who had come to celebrate with them. A legacy that goes far beyond titles or wealth. A legacy of love, Pearl agreed, her heart full to overflowing. The only kind that truly matters. The celebration of their 30th anniversary was a testament to the lives they had touched and the example they had set. The great hall of Silverton House was filled with people from all walks of life. Aristocrats and scholars, tenant farmers and London physicians, family members and friends who had witnessed the extraordinary partnership that had begun with a chance meeting by a lake 3 decades earlier. During the festivities, Lady Caroline, now in her 80s but still formidable, raised a toast to the couple. "To Russell and Pearl," she declared, her voice carrying clearly across the crowded room, "who reminded us all that the truest aristocracy is not of birth but of spirit, that the greatest wealth is not in possessions but in connections, and that the most powerful force in this world, despite all evidence to the contrary, remains love, freely given and gratefully received." The gathering responded with enthusiastic cheers, but it was the expressions on the faces of their children that moved Pearl and Russell most deeply. Edward, Caroline, and Hope looked at their parents with a mixture of pride, gratitude, and profound understanding of the gift they had been given, not just of material privilege, but of growing up in a home where love was the foundation, where individuality was respected, where purpose and passion were valued above conformity. As the evening drew to a close, they slipped away from the festivities to walk by the lake where their story had begun. The moon hung full and bright above them, casting a silver path across the water, and the air was scented with roses from the garden Pearl had created years before. 30 years, Russell marveled, drawing her close. "It seems both a lifetime and the blink of an eye." "The best kind of time," Pearl replied, her voice soft with emotion, rich with meaning, yet never enough when spent with those we love. They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the beauty of the night and the deeper beauty of a love that had transformed not only their own lives, but the lives of countless others through their children, their work, and the example they set of what marriage could be at its best. "I used to wonder," Pearl said at last, "how it was possible that a single dinner party, a chance meeting by this lake, could change the course of 2 lives so completely." "Not chance," Russell corrected her gently. "Fate, perhaps, or simply the inevitable recognition of 2 souls meant to find each other." Pearl smiled up at him, her heart as full of love as it had been on the day they wed. "Whatever brought us together, I am eternally grateful." "As am I," Russell replied, bending to kiss her with a tenderness that held all the passion of their youth and all the depth of their years together. "For the woman who endured a loveless marriage for 5 years, only to teach me the true meaning of love in a single night, and every night since." And as they walked back toward the warm lights of Silverton House, where their family awaited, Pearl knew that the greatest journey of her life had not been from merchant's daughter to duchess, or from lonely widow to beloved wife, but from a woman who had forgotten how to dream to one who had helped create a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. It was a journey she would make again, 1,000 times over, for the joy of walking it by Russell's side. The end. Dear listener, in the silence of this moment we share between the story that has just echoed in your mind and the real world awaiting your return. Allow me to offer these words as a shelter for your heart. Each breath you take now is a silent testament that life trusts you enough to offer you a new day. You need not have all the answers or see the entire path. Like the characters in this story, you need only the courage to take the next step. When you rest your head tonight, let every muscle relax with the certainty that you are exactly where you need to be on this journey. Know that as you sleep, the stars keep their silent vigil, and the universe continues its work of weaving the threads of destiny. You are not alone in your walk. Even in moments when the path seems solitary, there is an invisible network of love and protection that sustains you, even when your feet touch the most arid ground. May your dreams be portals to wisdom, and your awakenings opportunities for love. May you recognize the nobility that dwells in your spirit, not by title or circumstance, but by the essence that is uniquely yours. As whispered the wind in the trees of legends of the fall, some fight against the story of the world. I embrace mine. I have no regrets. Good night, and until our next meeting in the pages of time, Legends of the Fall. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Your time and your heart mean the world to us. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support truly keeps us motivated to bring you more stories of love, redemption, and breathtaking emotion. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being part of this journey. At the end of this video, another story suggestion from our channel will appear. Click it and let yourself be swept away by more unforgettable tales of passion, courage, and love. With all our gratitude, Legends of the Fall team.